When I was a kid, we went to Florida during the winter because it was warm. And it was nice because they had nice beaches. They had nice water you can go into. It was just wonderful to go into the ocean. But nowadays, it's different. There's been some major water quality issues over the past decade that's kind of questioned why people need to go to Florida to get the nice weather and whether it's healthy to go to Florida to get the nice weather and to do all the touristy things. And it's causing a problem with the local economy. And we're going to talk about that on this episode of Ocean Talk. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to Ocean Talk. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is where I talk all things ocean so you can be more aware of what's happening in the ocean and you can live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Florida water quality to be specific. Look, I love Florida. I think it's a great place to go to get sun, to go to beaches, to enjoy the ocean. I've gone scuba diving there. I've gone, just enjoying the weather, gone diving under piers and stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun. It's nice to go to Florida. However, over the past 2 decades, really, there have been a lot of water quality problems, notably in the mid-2000s and 2018, where we saw major red tide events, major algal mat events, which caused a lot of sickness. There were a lot of dead animals that were washing up on the beaches. It made it really horrible to go to beaches because the smell of rotting animals was just disgusting. It affected people's breathing. It affected just the enjoyment of going onto a beach, as you would imagine. And then there was some toxic algal blooms, which made it really bad for breathing. And in large concentrations, this stuff is bad. I'm going to explain that all today, why water quality has gotten so bad in Florida, what's happening to the local environment that's changing the local environment, and how it's affecting the economy, which at this point is probably the biggest thing to make the change, right? But first, let's go back in time a little bit to sort of who's been in charge of Florida. Now, this is not a political video. I don't care if it's conservative or Democrat who are in, or Republican or Democrat who are in power. Let's just talk about what's been happening with the regulation. So Governor Scott has traditionally been involved in politics for a number of years before Ron DeSantis got in. And, this is what they did while they were there. At one point, in Lake Okeechobee, there was certain levels of ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite and phosphate that had to be released into Lake Okeechobee, right? Okeechobee. I think that's how you pronounce it. Okeechobee. I think that's what it is. Anyway, so industries along the lake would dump their wastewater in there. And that wastewater had to follow specific regulations. Like I mentioned, they had to have certain numbers or under certain numbers for ammonia, nitrate, and phosphate. These are nutrients that can cause algal blooms if they get too high or the right levels with the right amount of heat. So in spring and summer, you get an influx of these nutrients coupled with the heat. You get just a huge phytoplankton bloom, whether it be freshwater or oceans. And where that water got discharged and where it went into the ocean really mattered, especially around the time of year with the heat, like I said, and the nutrients. So let's talk about what happened. So we had these numbers and it was going okay, right? Sometimes we'll have algal blooms, sometimes we wouldn't, but the numbers would be kind of, modeled after how many industries were dumping their wastewater and what those numbers had to be. Then Governor Scott said, you know what? Let's just chill out a little bit. If you industries, which a lot of it was big sugar, if you industries would say, hey, we're going to do our best to keep the numbers as low as possible so that we don't cause algal blooms and we don't put in a bunch of nutrients into the lake, then we'll be fine. No problem. Governor Scott said, thank you very much. We appreciate you looking out for the environment. We'll let you do what you do, because that's what a conservative government tends to do. They let the private companies do what they want to do. They don't want to have big government overseeing everything. That's that's not an opinion. That's just what conservatives do. And whether you like it or not, that's the way it goes, right? So the industry's like, we're going to use best practices only. Okay, we're going to use best practices. Well, all of a sudden, nutrients started to kind of creep up and creep up and creep up. And then we started to see more nutrients in the water as it got warmer and warmer throughout the springs and summer. And every year it got warmer and warmer, as we see with climate change. Algal blooms started to happen a little bit more. Now, it's not so bad when you have nutrients coming out of Lake Okeechobee because the lake is actually dammed. So the water would just go over, like once they release the water, it would go into the Everglades. So the Everglades is a best place to release nutrients because it would just take up those nutrients and it would grow and it would sustain as the Everglades. If you ever have a chance, I have never had a chance, but once I get the chance, I'm going down to the Everglades, do an airboat ride. It looks pretty cool. It's a really interesting place to be, a really interesting habitat to be. But one good thing is it's a wetland, so it actually takes up nutrients into its plants, and it just kind of takes away from going into the ocean or going into the waterways, which eventually end up in the ocean. So great, that's great. Then in comes Big Sugar, says, hey, by the way, we want to buy this piece of land here that's on the Everglades, and we want to make it into one of our plants. So, okay, that's great. But what happens is if you do that, then that water will come out into that area, and it has to be diverted or else it'll just flood that area. So that water comes out, and in what river system went out to the Atlantic, the other river system went out to the Gulf of Mexico. And when it does that, it concentrated those nutrients and it heated up the nutrients even more. And as it went, all these algal blooms started happening along the rivers. And when it got to the outskirts or the entrance into the ocean started to feel the algal blooms. Then you had these really thick algal mats that would happen a number of summers in a row. It got so bad that the smell was just disgusting. It would smother any kind of water. The water wouldn't really be able to turn over, so we didn't really see this type of oxygenated water. So it was really stagnant, and it was just flat, and it was covered, and it wasn't really that great in the first place. So now we have a lot of nutrients, a lot of algal blooms along the coast, and really in the Gulf of Mexico coast, which was affecting anything recreational that was happening. People weren't going onto the beaches because of the smell. People weren't going out fishing because of the smell. Just, it wasn't happening all the time. And so it affected, the local economy by quite a bit, which we'll get to in just a second. Then in 2018, a huge harmful algal bloom just popped up out of nowhere, which was, it's not fun, right? When you get this, it's basically a little dinoflagellate, right? They call it red tide. When this dinoflagellate gets in excess concentrations, the winds, the heat, the nutrients hit like this ideal sort of situation, you get this massive harmful algal bloom, which is toxic. So it'll kill a lot of species in the ocean. It will cause a lot of smell happening, and you don't want to be swimming in this type of thing. It's called red tide because it kind of makes the water a little brownish red. And so that came into the shore. So having all of this, you have the harmful algal blooms, you have the algal mats that are along the shore. The smell is ridiculous because of all the dead animals. Hundreds, if not thousands of dead animals were washing up ashore or just sinking to the bottom, affecting the local coastal area, right? Not going on beaches, not going out for recreation, like whether it be for diving, for snorkeling, for kayaking, for fishing, recreational or commercial. The fish weren't there. You're not going to be able to sell any fish during a harmful algal bloom anyway, even if you're doing commercial fishing. So a lot of this stuff just kind of got affected. And this happened a lot more than it should have. The big one was in 2018, but we've seen reports of it continuing to happen and just the algal blooms continuing to happen. It wasn't a good situation. In comes Ron DeSantis, not necessarily when he came in, he wasn't talking about doing climate change work or trying to reduce climate change or anything like that. He was actually the opposite. He never mentioned it during his campaign. People criticized him for it, but he still got in Florida regardless of what he thought about climate change or not. He did come out when he said, hey, we know we have a water quality issue. And that's when in 2018, when the harmful algal blooms came in. So we're going to put in more water quality stations around the state so that we can monitor this situation more and find out where the problem is coming from, even though we kind of knew where the problem was coming from. I haven't kind of looked at what that water quality data showed or if there's any action in terms of law or any kind of regulations or any further regulations that had to do with reducing water quality, but there's still a water quality problem. A bunch of organizations and a bunch of captains got together and said, we need to do something about it. So there was the Captains for Clean Water, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, and the Sanibel Captive Conservation Foundation retained a firm called Green Economics, not green as in Green, but Green, so the name Green Economics. And they basically did a study to quantify the economic impacts of harmful water quality events and degraded water quality on Southwest Florida economy. And the goal of the report is to measure the impact of poor water quality in the economies of Charlotte, Lee, and Collier counties. And these economic impacts also shine light on the fact that good water quality has a positive economic impact, and financial investments in projects and policies that improve water quality will pay off through a more robust economy. So here are the results. It shows that in another event, in Charlotte, Lee, and Collier counties, similar to the HABs event, the harmful algal blooms, experienced in 2005 and 2006, and in 2018, the study area would lose over $468 million in commercial and recreational fishing, over 43,000 jobs, $5.2 billion in local economic output, $17.8 billion in property values with an associated $60 million in property tax revenue, and finally $8.1 billion in the value of outdoor recreation or quality of life. I'm going to put the link in the description below so you can take a look at this executive summary that I've just read from that was in the article that I found, so you can check it out there. But this is something that's really serious when we look at what overall climate change, how it affects water quality, and how it affects our local economy. It's in a place like Florida, it's all connected. And that's something that we need to control. Climate change is harder to control because it's kind of in our own vices, right? We're already passing through a lot of levels that we shouldn't be passing through, that we didn't want to be passing through in terms of, how many more degrees above, 1990 levels or whatever the levels might be. But we're passing those already. We're passing those thresholds. It's harder to control from a behavior standpoint. Water quality is easier to control. You can control what industries put out in their wastewater. You can control that number, and it's up to the businesses and the industries to control that number. That would require, Big Sugar and other industries in Florida to actually work on more than best practices and look at actually reducing specific numbers through models, through water quality models, to make sure that their ammonia, nitrate, and phosphate levels are below a certain norm to ensure that this water quality doesn't get out of hand. And that will change year to year based on the prediction of what the weather's going to be like. Well, how much are we expecting the heat to rise? What are we expecting for winds, if they're going to change? Because like I said before, the harmful algal blooms depend on wind, heat, and nutrients. And if we can control the nutrients, then we're a third there. So that's always something that we can control. So in situations where the environment matters and it's affecting our local economy, we need to control what we can, and water quality is what we can control. And that's what this article says, and we need to abide by that. That's it for today's episode, and that's my opinion on today's episode. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you want to know more about ocean conservation and how you can protect the ocean, well, you can look up my podcast, How to Protect the Ocean, subscribe to it or follow it, whatever you would like to do, and you can hear more on the run, in your commute to work, in your car, walking your dogs, whatever you'd like to do, on your hikes, and you can get more information, or you can just tune in every Tuesdays and Thursdays when I release new episodes here on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Ocean Talk. I'm your host, Angelo, and have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.